Hello, Senior Stoner fans. It's the real Senior Stoner back at you for your Puffco Proxy OG Diamond Dab of the Day. Hello, everybody. As always, when you enjoy today's video, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button, send a like, and I reply to all comments. Let's get started with today's important topic. There's a lot of bad stuff going on in the world right now. There's a lot of bad stuff going on in our country right now. There's a lot of bad stuff going on, unfortunately, probably close to wherever you live right now in the world. So how do we cope with all the bad news coming out of everywhere? Let's get started. This is important. Whether it's the war in Europe, the cost of living, the climate crisis, weekly school shootings, mass shootings, storming robberies in groups, people getting hit on the head in a brick randomly. We have to find a way to cope with the bad news that's out there. Because it's out there. Let's get started with tools that we can help ourselves with. In Britain, during World War II, when they had to go into the shelters and they were being bombed by the German rockets, they had a term called put the kettle on. Well, that's the British response, putting the kettle on to troubled times. It's a calming effect that tea has. It's called lowering the stress hormone cortisol. And that's an interesting place to start. Well, in modern times now, we've got to manage our media diet. The temptation to doom scroll through all of our social media to watch the rolling news is strong during times of crisis. But it needs to be avoided. The link between that behavior and poor mental health is direct. We're not saying don't watch the news. We're not saying don't engage, don't find out what's going on in the world. But limiting the consumption rather than gorging on it all day is the advice. You offset doom with uplifting stories. Think about it. Even the World Health Organization recommends that people during the pandemic try to find inspiring stories somewhere. Try to find inspiration somewhere. Well, it's more than that. We've got to find ways to actually take positive action in these situations in the face of bad news. And there's a lot of it around. Easy to be overwhelmed and be feeling kind of powerless. Well, we need to focus on the positive action that we can take to break that state. Even if it's a tiny little tidbit, it's something, rather than just taking in constant bad news and feeling more and more immobilized by the bad news. So, worrying is a thought process, which can spin out of control. So maybe what we can do is focus more about the moment and think more about what we can do to offer support versus just understanding the horrors around us. And we always talk about this during stressful situations. Breathing. Breathing is critically important. Deep breaths help downplay in your body the difficult news. The neurotransmitters slow down a little bit. Remember, our stressful situation to emergency situations is flight or fright. So deep and slow breathing can trigger the part of our nervous system, can trigger it to release what's called oxytocin, the chemical of love. If that is released, you begin to feel better. You begin to think more clearly, with a perspective, thinking a little differently than the inundation of the bad news around us in the world. So you want to activate your brain for the aha. That's right. You want to do it for the aha, because continuous bad news can tip you over the edge. So you've got to pause. You got to find a way to oxygenate your brain, breathing. You got to find a way to slow down, think straight, as they say. So activating your brain can actually move you past the bad news, move you into a solution and a positive response. Sometimes the next step is to just sit there and feel whatever you're feeling, but tell your brain what you want it to do. And you know what? Out of the blue, you're going to come up with an aha. It's mindfulness over matter. We're wired to survive rather than just be happy. That's how human beings work. So we got to think how our brain works on a case-by-case scenario. So the brain loves to go all or nothing in. But the reality is somewhere in between all or nothing. So what we want to do is find comfort, connection, even joy in difficult times. So with a better mindset, one of growth, we can actually come through terrible situations standing on our 2 feet. There's an old saying called sleep on it, and it applies to grim news. It applies to hearing bad things, catastrophic things. Easy to jump right in. You're going to regret that later, very possibly. So if you can, find a way to shut your eyes and sleep on the bad news. Because our memories from the day get processed and moved from our emotional to our narrative mind. And then we can think about them and make decisions intelligently instead of being in the flight or fright mode. Shake it out, they say. Shake it out. That's right. There's an innate bodily reaction of shaking or trembling as an immediate response to trauma. Think about it. How many times do you feel shaky? Well, guess what? We've all been socialized out of it. We perceive tremors as weakness, something that's embarrassing, or even an illness. So if you do it, you try to hide it, but everybody does it. Think about what that is. It's a sign. It's your body telling you something, that issue is a little too much for you to handle. It's called body wisdom, and we should trust our body wisdom. And unfortunately, when we respond to bad news, it might not always be as instant or as visible as a case of shaking, like I just talked about. A lot of times, we get what's called a delayed response. That's right. In the moment, there you are, strong and sturdy. After the moment, as you start to let the adrenaline slow down, you recognize that you soldiered on. Now you need to allow yourself some self-compassion. You've got to find a way to talk about it. That's my final statement to discuss. It's easy to keep everything inside. Coping mechanisms that keep it inside are unhealthy. There's a huge value of social support. There's a huge value that if you've had bad news, expressing those negative emotions allows us to own them. And if we express them publicly, it allows us to be more self-compassionate and kind to ourselves because we see in others what we see in ourselves. You see, we can cope with bad news. There are tools out there, many more than I just listed. This is the tip of the spear, so to speak, the low-hanging fruit that we can talk about. But everybody has this happen. And right now, with the things we hear on the news, from horrible mass shootings to horrible destruction of communities and actual mass killings, how can we be calm? We can. We can. Don't feel like you're out of control. You are in control of your life. And you, any of us, hearing the bad news, don't have to fall victim to the bad news. We can move past it. This is the Real Senior Stoner with my OG Puffco proxy, taking a diamond hit on green for all of you. As we approach difficult situations differently, the key is make sure you approach them. Don't be swallowed up by them. Stay in control of the difficult situations as much as you can. You know what to do, everybody. Hit that subscribe button. Tell your friends. Send a like. And I'll reply to all those comments. Have a wonderful day. And as always, thanks for joining. The Real Senior Stoner. Cheers, everybody.